Hello, it's iBookBinding's podcast, and today our guest is Peter Geraty. Peter is a bookbinder and a bookbinding teacher from around Boston, Massachusetts, United States. Hi, Peter.
Hi, guys.
And the other guy is my co-host, Pavel. He joins us from Moscow.
Hi.
I know something about your career and things about things you do, and you've been my teacher for some time at the American Academy of Bookbinding, and you've been teacher to many other people as well. But first thing I wanted to ask you is how did it happen so that you started making books? What made you to start this career?
Yeah. When I was in college, in the early 70s, 71 to 75, I think it was, I was an art major and I was involved in printmaking. And I needed a job to make a little extra money and got a job with a local print shop that was doing offset lithography printing. It was the first time I'd been involved in that kind of thing. And the guy that was running it, his impetus for having a business was that he wanted to be a millionaire, which is to me is a very odd reason to want to do something, but that was his drive. He was a terrible boss. He sort of turned me loose on an offset press without giving me much instruction. And I proceeded to work on that, but I was only there for a week. I just couldn't stand the guy. I couldn't stand the place. And I never went back to pick up my paycheck for that 1 week. Shortly thereafter,
I had a similar experience.
Yeah. It was so bad that you just didn't want to stay put long enough to get paid.
Yeah, I've been an apprentice at a bindery for some time, for almost a month, and in the end, I just left and didn't get my money. Yeah.
So, but shortly thereafter, I heard about a company called Unicorn Press. They'd been in Santa Barbara, California, and they had moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, where I was in college. And I heard that they were interested in having people help out.
Mm-hmm.
So I went by there and talked with Alan Brilliant, who was the owner of the place. He and his wife, Teo Savory, were the publishers. And a friend of mine worked there. So I went over and spoke with them, and they were happy to have me come and volunteer to work, which I did for the fall semester of 1974. And they had a Vandercook letterpress. So everything was letterpress printed. The books were sewn by hand. Usually the books were just simple single folio chapbooks.
Mm-hmm.
There was much to them at all. Sometimes they were wrapped in paper. Sometimes they had a hard case on them. So I learned to do typesetting and printing. Also learned to do some bookbinding that was, very simple, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But I was interested in it and stayed there for about a year and a half. In 1975, in the beginning of 75, I was actually paid to work there, but it was subsistence wages. They had very little money.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't pay me much. I could barely keep, my apartment and my food. But I really enjoyed doing the work. And as I'd been a printmaker in college, printing was not that dissimilar to what I was doing. Um, and then I decided to move to Boston. My brother was living up there. We're from North Carolina.
Mhm.
So I decided to move up there. And when I got up there, I got a job as a superintendent in a condominium. So I didn't have to immediately um, have work because I had a place to live and I got a little bit of money. And I started taking classes at Harcourt Bindery,
Mhm.
which was within easy walking distance of where I was living, and really enjoyed that. And then I got hired at Harvard University in one of the libraries to just do some minor repair. Worked in the stacks, just had minor equipment, um, and I wasn't doing a lot of stuff that required skill and knowledge so much. Um, but there was a woman working in one of the local libraries. Her name was Doris Freitag. And Doris had been trained in Germany before the war.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure what her timing was, but she eventually ended up in the States and had been working at Harvard for quite a number of years
Yeah.
and was a very skilled binder. And Doris started not teaching me directly, but she would help me when I got stuck with things. And I could always talk with her about issues I was having. Um, and we became friends um, during the time I was there and afterward.
Mhm.
And I quit working at Harvard because I got a job with a small bindery in Cambridge that did handbook binding. Um, Incidentally, the owner also made S&M gear, which I was much less interested in. But that's he did that. He did that for the gay population in the area. And all I did was I worked on books. He worked on the S&M gear, and everything was just fine. And I worked there for about a year, but the owner wasn't able to teach me very much.
Mhm.
Um, and eventually I was able to get hired at Harcourt Bindery. So I left the place in Cambridge and moved on to Harcourt. And I was at Harcourt for about 4 years. I came in sweeping the floors and making marbled end papers and that sort of stuff. And by the time I left 4 years later, I was the shop manager and I was doing all the leather binding.
So it was a proper apprentice's path.
Yeah, it's in as much as it could be. I was taught what I needed to know to do the work.
Mhm.
Uh, and Sam Ellenport, who owned the bindery, was very concerned about getting the work out on time and without it costing a lot of money. There were things that we did that one would call shortcuts. Um, they didn't. Well, some of the work we did there didn't hold with my fantasy of what should be done.
Mhm.
Sam and I got along very well. We had clashes from time to time because of some of those things, but that we would work that out as we went along. And I was really grateful for the opportunity to work there because to work for about 4 years, 40 hours a week, doing nothing but binding all day long, and doing it quickly, that was a real education. And unfortunately, it's not an education that is offered to people nowadays. I'm sorry that it's not because it's an extremely valuable um, skill or a place to learn your skills, even if you might want to work in a different manner. But to learn to work in a particular way and to do it quickly and efficiently, um, that's something that's the best education you could expect to get without working directly with a master binder as an apprentice. I mean, Harcourt.
And why can't you nowadays? There's just no place for it economically?
That's pretty much it. In the US, I would say there's probably about, I'm guessing at this, there's probably 3 or 4 binderies that still do some sort of handwork. But a lot of what there is in this country is mechanized. I don't know how it is in Europe or in the UK, but most of the binders in this country, they're like me. They're single people. I do have 2 employees, which is a little more unusual. A lot of the binders in this country, they just have 1 employee, if that.
Or even none, yeah.
Yeah, just themselves frequently. When you've got employees, you can get, I mean, don't tell my employees this, but I pay them less than I pay myself. You know, so you can have more people working at a manageable wage and charging the money you need to charge to get the work done, and therefore make some sort of a profit and keep a larger shop going, pay for the larger amount of overhead that you have. I mean, my shop is probably, I would guess it's one of the few largest shops in the country in terms of square footage, and as I say, in terms of employees. The same hand, having a shop that size means you need to constantly be feeding work into the machine of the shop. You need to constantly find work that you can turn out, and you still have to be mindful of what you charge for the work. Over the years, I think I have charged too little, and I've been remedying that. Frankly, I have to say partly the length of time I've been doing this and the number of people that know me means I can charge a bit more than someone who is a relative unknown just coming into the field. So that's useful. I was a relative unknown, and it was hard to get enough money to run the shop. Fortunately, I'm married to someone who had a regular paycheck.
This helps a lot. Yeah.
It helps tremendously. It really does. And I don't know how, I do know binders who are married to other artists, and frankly, I don't know how they do it. Because it's a huge amount of stress knowing where you're going to get the mortgage from or a college education for your children, that sort of thing. So I find it hard to recommend this as a lifestyle. And frankly, when I teach at the American Academy of Bookbinding, there's a small part of me that I feel a little bit bad teaching people to do what I do because of the fact it's going to lead to a hard life. But they thoroughly enjoy what they're doing, which I have been doing. So if it's something you thoroughly enjoy, you're just going to have to find a way to make it work, which is what I've done. And people that have been in the field for a long time have also done. They've managed to keep it going no matter what.
Could you talk a bit about looking for work? I mean, you've been binding books since well before either of us has been born. So in the era before internet, how do you look for orders when there's not enough work?
Right, yeah. I have to say the internet has really helped. And I don't do Facebook or any of that stuff, just my webpage has helped. But in prior times, it really is a lot about word of mouth. It was also about looking for publishers, libraries, institutions, and calling people up, introducing yourself, maybe sending a letter. maybe arranging to drive to meet them. But, I'd say probably 75% of the work was through word of mouth. Also, at the time I started, there weren't that many of us. If you wanted a book bound, you could probably count on 2 hands or maybe 4 hands, people that you could get to do the work.
You mean
People
in the area or in the country?
in the country. That might not be quite the right number, but it was a very small pool of binders. So you could get the work that way. I think now, obviously the pool is large now of binders, and the pool of good binders is large. And I love that. When I introduce myself to people and tell them what I do, most of the time, the first question out of their mouth is, "Isn't that a dying art?" Unfortunately, I can tell them, no, it is far from it. But making a living is not easy.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's not a dying art, but still, it's a hard business, and maybe not a dying niche for a business, but you need to try hard to make decent money.
You do. And I think one of the things that I try to do is to create a shop that's more like a value-added type of situation. You can bind very plain books by hand, at which point you're looking in terms of numbers. Like you'd have to do hundreds and hundreds at a lower price to make enough money to get by on. When we start looking at some of the work that we've done here in the shop, you'll see that we tend not to bind books in that sort of plain manner, and we don't bind them quickly and cheaply. That also means that the person you're binding them for has to sell them for some real money also. So
or they have to be a collector or something like that, or an institution.
Exactly. And there are collectors we do work for who will pay what's necessary to get the job done. But it is hard to meet those people. I think even with the internet, it still doesn't hurt, going around and contacting people. One of the largest clients that we have had, I got a postcard from them, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I'm not sure when, advertising the kinds of books they did. So I did email them. I didn't send her a letter, but I did email them, letting them know we were here and saying, if you ever need a binder who can, do interesting things with the books, let us know. That led to a relationship that started about 15 years ago. And even though it's 21st editions, even though they are no longer doing books per se, we're now doing furniture with them, boxes that really are, quite special boxes. So, still reaching out to people. I wouldn't necessarily sit back hoping stuff comes to you. I think you do have to make concerted efforts to reach people.
And in terms of artistic freedom, in terms of choices, what to do, who do you prefer to work for? For institutions, for publishers, or with clients and collectors directly? Where is there more of a dialogue between you and the client?
That's something that grows. I think when you're doing fine bindings or design bindings, the clients coming to you because they've already seen your work. They sort of know how you work. There are a number of fine binders. So if they don't like your work, they'll go talk to somebody else. So you can sort of make the assumption if they're coming to you, they're also coming in part because they want what you can do as opposed to what somebody else. It's not a question of quality, it's a question of style and artistic input. I am fine with clients who come to me, like we've worked with publishers that come to us and present the design they want to use. I'm fine with that because we are a job shop as much as we are any other kind of shop. As long as they allow us to do as good of a job as we can do, I'm fine to do their designs. 21st editions, when we first started working with them, they had certain ideas in mind, but the first edition I did for them, I was able to talk them into letting me do the design for that binding. And up until that point, binders they had been using, who were all very fine binders, just had not really offered them these kinds of options. You know, now it's become a thing with 21st where it's a dialogue back and forth. And that happens with a lot of other clients as well. But there's
still not every fine binder, not every binder is a design binder. It's a bit of step for a bookbinder to start making design. I'm not a design binder. I can do, I don't know, leather binding, fine binding, but I'm not a designer, and it's always been hard for me to move forward to do something like that. And so it's not.
Stefan, you bring up an interesting thing about binding, because I never saw myself, like early on in my career when I was at Harcourt, and I was doing a lot of leather work. I did start to get involved in exhibitions that the Guild of Bookworkers was having. There was somebody that had me, a dealer who had me do some designs on bindings. And I did some, but then when the 80s, midway through the 1980s, the market collapsed. And even some of the finest design binders, at least in this country, were having trouble getting work. The financial aspect of the country was really bad. And so that dried up and I stopped doing them. I didn't think of myself necessarily as a design binder. And I have no training in design, even though I did work in printmaking. So I sort of thought of myself more as a job binder. But I've discovered over the years that you can train yourself in design. And I think that's what some of us don't realize. And it doesn't hurt if you can speak with somebody who does know design. Say like Don Glaister at the American Academy of Bookbinding, people like him, if you can talk with people like that, if you can look critically at the kinds of work other binders are turning out, I think you can start to understand what they're doing, and you can branch out beyond your own abilities. Now, some of us may never be really great design binders. I'm content if that's what my life is like. But I haven't gotten back to design binding in probably 20 years because I've been too busy trying to keep the shop moving. If I ever retire, I intend on doing that, but we'll see if I get a chance to retire or not.
You returned to 80s for a moment, and I also wanted to ask another question about 70s and the 80s. You told about this experience of being an apprentice and studying bookbinding in an efficient way. But what were the options for a person who wanted to study bookbinding in that era? Because nowadays you have some specialized schools like American Academy of Bookbinding or North Bennett Street School. You have some sections or faculties at different universities all over the country, in the United States, I mean, because in different countries the options are different. But what were the options then?
You're right. None of those places existed. They all have happened since then.
Mm-hmm.
So what you could do, there were a few binderies like Harcourt that were still up and around. And those places, if you could get a job there, you could learn. There are still, you know, some of these binderies, as I said earlier, do some handwork, not as much as they used to. And, you know, you can go there and at least work with your hands all day long. But back then, there were a few more binderies like that. There also were some older individual binders that you might be able to latch onto. But I'm not aware of any of them doing any official sort of apprenticeship. We were back in the 60s and in the 70s, and I came into this in the 70s, the arts and crafts movement was really starting to take hold in this country. Probably elsewhere, I'm just not aware of the other areas. But people were starting to do a lot more woodworking, pottery, weaving. In fact, I initially wanted to be a woodworker. And you can see where I got now. I also wanted to be a potter. I didn't manage either of those. But there still were not a lot of places you could go, but there weren't a lot of us looking for it. And we shared a lot. Like at Harcourt, you know, the people that were working there, Dan Kellum, Carl Eberth, Joe Newman, Martina Mikulka, all of these people, we shared everything that we knew. Edwin Heim, who was director of Ascona after Hugo Peller, he came over to the States. I don't remember when, but I had moved to East Hampton at that time, where I am now. And he came and met a lot of the binders here, because there are a lot of binders in this area. There were even more earlier on. And he was surprised at how we shared information amongst ourselves, where in Europe, at that time anyway, people tended to be very private about what they knew.
That's what I wanted to comment on, because I had a discussion with a colleague of mine from Romania, from Bucharest, Mihai Vertejaru, and he told me that initially when he decided to go for an apprenticeship in bookbinding, he was taught by a master bookbinder in Bucharest, and even during the process, he started to understand that some things are not right. He isn't taught proper way, and especially after he moved on to work as a professional bookbinder, he found out how many things he was taught wrongly, and his understanding was that his master was protecting his secrets. And for me, this approach is just absolutely insane, because well, I can understand why master would like to protect his or her secrets, but it's just counterproductive, and you are teaching your apprentice who helps you do your job, and you are teaching them wrong, and it's just all over. It's all over wrong. So,
well, I was just emailing with a student from AAB this morning who was having issues with gilding, and I mentioned in the email how back in the 17th, 18th possibly into the 19th century. I'm not so clear on that. Gilding, edge gilding, was done by people who were trained as edge gilders, and they were part of a guild.
Yeah.
In some parts of, in the UK and in some parts of Europe, I don't know the full history of that, but because of the guild, they kept their secrets,
Yeah.
So that they could not be usurped by people who would charge less. I think that same attitude sort of fell down from that time to, right up to not that long ago.
Yeah.
I think it's, people like yourselves, people like me who come from that arts and crafts movement, we weren't happy with that and started challenging it. And I think that's a lot less the case now. I don't know anybody who keeps secrets from anyone else. It's how we all learn, because you can always improve. I'm not the best
exactly.
binder in the world. I never will be the best binder in the world, but I can improve. Everybody can. So I think sharing information is the key, which is what I like about teaching.
As far as I understand, it's also a sort of it's a bit in French tradition of bookbinding, when you have a separate master, separate professional for every step of binding, and
Yes.
they're very strict about keeping this order, and you really wouldn't know other elements of the process. You are specialized in something. In a single process, and then you just wouldn't share your secrets with anybody because they will take your job away from you.
Right, right.
Well, watch trade used to be like that until comparatively recently.
What trade?
Watch trade.
Okay.
Like a family used to make only one small part of the mechanism.
So
Imagine that, like 100 families making a single watch, but the result was that the techniques improved so fast, because if you concentrate on one small part, you can make it more precisely, you can make it smaller, you can make it faster. So there are pros and cons.
There are. I mean, when you look at 19th century sort of Victorian leather bindings, they're nearly perfect, because one person did the sewing, one person did the gilding, one person did all the leather work, one person did all the tooling, and then another person would put up the end sheets and do whatever finishing to the book was necessary. Books that were so cleanly done you could eat off of them. And then it's one of the issues that I face personally. It's also, I think, one of the issues we may all face is that we look at that perfection and execution and think, why can't I do that? Well, that's the reason you can't do that. There are some binders who can do that. There's no doubt about that. The majority of us do something that is maybe a notch or two less than those Victorian bindings. And the Victorian bindings had issues with longevity. Part of the reason the tooling is so crisp and beautiful in them is because the leather is pared so thin.
Yeah.
When you sink a tool into a piece of leather that has some depth to it, it's not as easy to get such a crisp, beautiful tooling on that.
Yeah.
But then the boards will break off over time, or the cords will get fanned so thin when they're laced in. There are problems with it. So I'm sure that you can strike a beautiful intermediary spot between that and something with longevity. And I don't mind if the hand shows in the book. I don't mind if there's evidence of this thing being done by hand. Not that I want it dirty and well done, but
Gold tooling is definitely one of the processes that takes a lot of time to master and to keep it in working order, because it's like being a musician, because you need to train all the time and you need to keep your skills in well oiled.
right. Yes.
And do you make your books all by yourself? Do you still are you still active in all the stages? You sew, you tool, you work with leather.
Yes, I do. As I said earlier, I have some employees. They work about 2/3 or 3/4 of the week. They're not in the shop today. In fact, since the pandemic, they really haven't been in the shop. They have their own shops in the same building, which is ideal because I can hand them work. They go off to their shop, do it, bring it back, and we go on like that. So I don't necessarily do every bit of a book. I don't sew that much anymore. There's other things I need to do. I do all of the leather work. I do all of the gilding, and I do all of the tooling. But then we don't turn out a lot of books with gilding and tooling. We may turn out a lot of leather books. And some of them may have aspects of that. I did an edition of 40, actually in the end it was 42 cloth-bound books that I just finished that had full gilt edges. So that was over 120 edges that I had to do. And you can get to be halfway decent when you're doing that kind of work. It was also the paper on those edges was problematic. It was paper for inkjet printing, and it's kind of soft and pulpy.
Yeah.
So trying to get a good edge on that was not easy. And the first books I did were not as good as the last ones I did, because I kept learning and improving ways to address that kind of paper. So it was a good process to learn. So I can do all of those things, but because I'm spread thin, I'm not a great tooler. I'm not a great gilder. I'm pretty good with leather, but it's rare that you get to do all of that stuff and do it well.
That was a good segue, your experience with this inkjet paper, to another thing I wanted to talk about. We just recorded a podcast with Brenda Gallagher, one of your students and colleagues as well. And we discussed that Bookbinder constantly learns new things and finds new tricks and gets new ideas on how to better or differently do something. So besides this experience with inkjet paper, what were your recent findings and new things these eureka moments in bookbinding?
It's hard to give anything specific about that right now. I would have to say that dealing with the inkjet papers did give me a lot more information about just gilding in general.
Yeah.
It made me further aware of the differences in the papers that you have to deal with. For instance, I'm doing some gilding right now on a new Bible. It was printed on India paper. It's a typical Bible. It had a machine gilt edge when it was sent to me, but the owner wanted what they call a red under edge, There's a hand gilt edge, but a red background to it. And I've actually found it particularly hard to get a really beautiful edge on it. The red under is not a problem. The paper is so hard that any wrinkle in the leaf when you lay it down will show. When I was doing the inkjet paper, the wrinkles wouldn't show.
Yeah.
So I was going between a really hard paper and a really soft paper. And that's one of the things that we have to face nowadays, is that papers are sort of all over the map now. We're not working on books with nice, well-sized handmade papers that often. So we're just faced with such a broad variety. I would say, though, that the eureka moments come not as big things with the heavens breaking open and rays of sun shooting through. It's more like when you're doing a lot of one process at a time, you make minor adjustments in how you do the process. If you do just one book, you can't appreciate this. When you're doing hundreds of books, you appreciate how just simply where you stack the books. Like I'm working with another binder in this building right now, and you'll see evidence of this when we start looking around the shop. We're doing a 3-volume set of a collection of art books. And there are 52 sets. So there's 120 regular bindings. There's 36, and the regular bindings are going to be half leather. Then there's 36 that are going to be full leather. Each individual book is getting its own slipcase. The half leather bindings are going to get half leather slipcases. The full leather bindings are going to get full leather slipcases. And the books, they're, I think they're like about 32 centimeters tall, and they're around 25 centimeters wide, and they're like 4.5, 5 centimeters thick. So they're big size. It's going to take, the other binder, Mark Tomlinson, has his own shop, and he works by himself. So there's myself and my 2 employees, and the 4 of us are going to spend 6 months doing this these books. So I'm in the process of punching the holes. Well, I have a hole punching gadget. And I start with the stack of pages on the left side of the hole punch. And as I punch them, I move them to the right side. And that's sort of the way I've always been doing it. I was doing this yesterday, and I realized if I had the stack that I'm punching the holes in on the left side and the stack I have punched on the left side, it means I am just moving from the left to the machine back to the left instead of going left, machine, right. It's these tiny little changes in how you operate can be key things, key insights, not only about speeding it up, but in how you turn an end cap, how you form a leather corner. Just things like this. You want to go at your work. I hate the word mindful because it's become such a cliche, but you need to pay attention to what you're doing. And if somebody tells you to do it this way, thank them very nice. Try it that way. Even when I'm teaching at AAB, I make my students aware that the way I am teaching them is a way
one of the ways.
but it is not the only way. So you take what you learn. First, you should do it that way because you need to get it into your bones and into your brain and your hands. But then start to question it. Talk to other binders, see what you can come up with on your own, see what you can learn from other binders. And by and large, most binders nowadays are more than willing to share what they know.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also true that not only speed is important, speed is often important for large projects like you described, but lowering the margin of error is also very important. Fewer errors you make, less time you spend on fixing these errors afterwards. So and standardized routines and routines that are comfortable for you and logical for you are very important in lowering this number of errors, because if something is not working for you, you will make a mistake.
Yes, yes. Well, and you bring up an interesting point about errors. Errors, obviously they're to be avoided, but you can learn so much from an error. When I was working at Harcourt, every once in a while, the person doing the gold tooling, they might make a mistake and misspell something in the title, or they might burn one of the center tools, putting it into a panel. Well, at Harcourt, the way we would often do the tooling there is that we do what they call a panel in centers, which means you've got a rectilinear gold line defining each panel of the spine, and you have a center tool in them. So I got to be pretty good at taking my knife and incising out alongside the tooled gold line and removing that panel, replacing the panel, and feathering the edge so that I could give it back to the finisher, and that person could retool the gold lines and then put the new center tool or the new titling in there. And sometimes you couldn't even tell a change was ever made, but you get to be skilled at using your tools and knowing the materials, knowing how far you can push them before there's an issue, that kind of thing. So there's a lot you can learn from making mistakes. Not that I advocate making them.
This reminds me of one of the experiences I had with Don Glaser while studying at the AAB on his course, so on fine binding. So when I was making one of the leather bindings, and while I was pairing the leather, I made a cut exactly at the same level, so that when turned in, this cut landed on the edge of the cardboard.
Yes.
And yeah, I was upset, and leather is expensive, especially when you are a young student, and time also is not expensive, but it's time, and you don't want to spend a lot of time preparing leather once again. And Don came to me and he was like, okay, I don't know if we can fix it, but we will try. And we found a way. We slapped a piece of blue tape over this cut, and I turned it in. And nowadays I still have this book, and because I gave it to my wife, and well, she has this book. Nowadays I cannot find where this cut is because it was fixed properly.
Right. And well, and as Don said, I don't know if we can fix this, but I have to say that for me, the most exciting thing about doing what I do is trying to figure this stuff out. And it's not just figuring out mistakes. As you'll see with some of the work we've done here, figuring out how to create the effect we want requires a lot of head scratching, experimentation and stuff like that. But it's that kind of thing that enables somebody with as much experience as Don or myself has of coming to you when you've got that problem and being able to quickly calculate in their head a very plausible way of dealing with it. And you know, that's what you get from doing the work, is you get that, you just get that backlog of knowledge. And even if you don't know how to do something, you can pretty well formulate a fairly decent way that it might work.
You talk a lot about techniques, about mastering techniques and knowing a material, specifically leather, I assume in your case. But so much of modern bookbinding is about using new materials and combining materials in novel ways. I know there has always been something like that in design bindings. You can find late 19th century bindings using eggshell inlays, say, or something something exotic. But overall, I'd say that it's mostly in post-war and even maybe late 20th century bookbinding that you get proliferation of new materials. What was your experience with that?
I like new materials. I don't use a lot of different things. I may use metal. I use magnets. I use plastic. You know, things like that. In the shop, we have decorated silk, for instance, to use as a binding. We've decorated paper plenty of times to use as a binding. There are other people who get more into exotics, and I would call them exotics just because they don't fit into traditional binding per se. But if I found that there was a material that fit what I wanted to do and it wasn't a binding material, I'd just figure out how to use it, is what it comes down to. And I mean, you know, you'll also come up against a time when, all right, maybe I can't figure it out. In which case, okay, I have to change my idea about what I wanted. But boy, you push the edge as far as you can until the rubber band breaks, trying to figure out how you're going to do it. And there's plenty of nice materials out there to explore with. So, you know, I think people should really do that. I mean, don't do it to be novel. Do it because it fits with what you're trying to say, with what you're doing. I can't stand it when people do things because they can do it. I prefer to do it because it's the appropriate thing for the direction they're going with the design or the type of binding. And Lord knows when you're doing, when you've got a publisher bringing something to you, you're going to be faced sometimes with materials or techniques that you haven't had to deal with. And they haven't necessarily thought through themselves, but by the time it comes to you, it could be a little too late to say, well, that's not going to work. So then it falls to you to figure out how to make it work.
Well, when we discussed how American and European traditions used to be different, in that American tradition was much more open, and in nowadays when everyone knows everyone, when we can talk to you and I'm in Moscow, Stepan is in Amsterdam, and you're in Boston.
Pretty neat.
Is there even such a thing as American tradition, European tradition, French tradition? I mean, as an alive entity, not as sterilization, doing like they used to, but is there still regional variations in your craft?
I think that's a really good question, Pavel. And it's something I have thought about a lot. I think those differences are certainly breaking down. There's a lot going on across the ocean back and forth. with people exchanging ideas, and binders starting to write books and put out videos about how they do things. I mean, YouTube University is probably the biggest teacher in the world on bookbinding right now. And you know, some of it's dreck, but some of it is quite useful and informative. It doesn't seem to me to be such a big difference. You know, at the risk of saying something that is improper, I tend to think that some of the French binders might still hold to what we were talking about earlier, where maybe there is one person who is paring the leather, where the binder has forwarded the book. They may still get the leather pared, they may still get the edges gilt. They'll put the leather on themselves, but they may still have another person doing the tooling. I don't know how true that is nowadays. My sense is that in the UK and in the United States, it's pretty much the same. I don't know much about German binders. You know, you guys are the only two Russians I know, so there you go. But I think that is breaking down. I do enjoy seeing the kind of paring knife that a binder will use, because it's going to be an English knife, which is sometimes referred to as a German knife, or it's going to be a Swiss or a French knife, and those two get screwed up. Usually the German or the English knife have a bevel. A true German knife, you can actually flex the blade. When you put it down, you can literally flex the blade, and the blade tends to be semi-hemispherical, semi-rounded, where the English knife is stiff and has a angled blade. And the Swiss and the French both have rounded edges, but the French usually has a wooden handle attached to it. And the Swiss is usually just a flat piece of steel. But you'll see books giving different names to these. And I'm not the expert, so who knows, my names may be screwed up too. But it's just fun to, when you meet a binder for the first time and you see the knife they use, you have somewhat of a sense of what their background might be like, where they may have learned what they know at that point. I was trained in an English shop at Harcourt. Harcourt was based on English style. So I use the English / German style knife. But I also have the Swiss knife, and I like that a lot too. So there's much less of a difference now, that's for sure.
And it's also great when people decide not to limit themselves by these borders, because, okay, I'm following the British tradition, I will use only the English knife and nothing else. That's well, for somebody maybe it works, but when you allow yourself to step out of your comfort zone and try something different, try something new, you may find out that there are so many beautiful things around you.
Oh yeah, well, in teaching, and I know we're going to get onto that in a second, but the way I learned, and this is sort of what I try to impart to students, is that I got a smattering of teaching by going to every single workshop I could find. I actually lived 2 hours west of Boston. I used to live in Boston, especially when I was at Harcourt. And every time, Bernard Middleton, Tina Muir, Philip Smith, Ola Olson, these people would come through and I would take their classes, and try and learn as much as I could, even though they were doing things differently than I was learning. So I really tried to get a broad amount of knowledge, but then once I had that, I tried to bring it back into a tighter grouping of techniques that I could master myself. Once I got those techniques fairly well understood, then I would go back out onto the branches of the tree again and start looking for little things that I could add to what I was doing, or maybe ways I could change what I was doing. But I found it, first it was just, there was an overload of information coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to pull that into a tighter thing so I could focus and learn. But then when you've got that, you can go back out and get all this other neat stuff out there and meet other people and learn ways they do things and alter what you do, and just have this nice back and forth with other binders, and sometimes with other craftspeople who are not binders, to learn stuff. So yeah, I'm glad the barriers are disappearing.
So that's it for this time. As usual, we are very grateful to all our viewers. We will be happy to see some comments below this video. Special thanks to our patrons on Patreon. Thanks to your money, we are able to edit our podcasts and make more of them. We appreciate your support quite a lot. And if any of our viewers would like to join the crowd of our supporters on Patreon, you can just use the link below. Pledges start with only $1 or €1 per month. And with levels higher than €3 or $3 per month, you get some additional stuff like digitized books about book arts. If you like this video, please like it, follow us on YouTube, maybe check our Etsy store and our blog. There is also a newsletter on our website, so a lot of stuff to follow and to read. And thanks again for watching. See you next time.